the FBI is creating militia groups, and then they are getting basically duping Americans who don't know better into joining these groups. And then they're hosting meetings and FTXs where the FBI is suggesting that they go do something violent. So at the Dublin meeting, the FBI was suggesting, and remember that this is during June of 2020. So if you guys remember, we were in lockdowns, but there was also peaceful protests occurring, if you know what I mean.
I heard about those. They
So
looked pretty crazy.
one of those peaceful protests was in Columbus, Ohio that night, the night of the Dublin meeting. And the FBI informants were trying to get these men to go armed into that conflict. And it's just kind of amazing because you think, well, if they did and something happened, like what was the FBI's plan there? It's truly bizarre. And it reminds me too of, so I'll just tie this to J6. The head of the Detroit field office at the time, they call him the SAC, right? The special agent in charge of the Detroit field office was a man named Stephen D'Antuono during the entire Whitmer case. 1 week after the guys are arrested in October of 2020, they're arrested October 7. On October 13th, he's promoted to be the assistant director of the Washington, D.C. field office by Christopher Wray himself.
Oh, wow.
So he is actually in charge overseeing everything when J6 happens. And it's interesting because if we go back to April of 2020, in Michigan, you know, Whitmer has the harshest lockdown. She's very proud of that. That was actually some of her mandates were later deemed unconstitutional.
That's right.
But she was doing things like you could go buy marijuana from like a pot dispensary, but you couldn't buy seeds. You couldn't go get your hair cut. You know, like all of these
straight up
arbitrary, tyrannical, bizarre things she was doing upset a lot of people, really on all sides of the political spectrum. So these rallies were occurring, you know, in Michigan at that time. There's one in April and there's another one in June. But the one in April, there's two in April. There's April 15 and April 30th. At the April 30th one, this is at Lansing. And of course, Dan Chappell, who becomes the XO of the Wolverine Watchmen and essentially the leader of the Wolverine Watchmen, tells his FBI handlers that, hey, I think the Wolverine Watchmen are going to do something. He says that they're going to, and he tells the FBI this before this rally occurs. He says they have a plan to storm the Capitol. And only a few of the Watchmen even were there that day. So it's like, if this was a plan, you're going to have 6 guys storm the Capitol, really?
Right.
What kind of plan is this? But that's what he told his handlers, is that the guys had a plan to storm the Capitol. So the FBI, and this is hilarious, the FBI, like I said, Agent Jason Chambers, who has his private intelligence company, we'll talk about that in a minute. But there's another one, Heinrich Impala, who is a known perjurer, by the way, previously accused of perjury in other cases, said of him by a defense attorney and a former U.S. attorney for the Western District of Michigan that he can't tell the truth.
Oh.
He has problems telling the truth.
Oh.
You know, he occasionally lacks candor.
He has a doctor's note for that? How does that work?
So he's overseeing this at the day that this rally occurs, where the informant says, hey, these guys are going to storm the Capitol. The FBI sets up a mobile command center and says, all right, so we're going to have you go. You wear your recording device. It's going to be a live wire. So basically, the informant could talk to the FBI in real time. They think that Pete Musico, Joe Morrison, the founder of the Watchmen, his father-in-law, they believe he has a live grenade on him. And all of these men are in their full kits. They're fully armed. And they go to the Capitol. Now, there's tons of people there that day. They stood in line, actually. This came out at trial. They stood in line for an hour and went through COVID screening before they got into the building. There was no storming of anything.
Went through COVID screening. Great.
Yeah, they got their temperatures checked. They went through the COVID screening. Totally peaceful. There's video of them inside the building, though. But anyways, the informant says into the wire that, hey, I think these guys are getting ready to do something. He doesn't really say why he thinks that. But the FBI tells the Lansing Capitol Police to stand down, open the doors, and let everybody in. And so what happens is you end up with these pictures the next day and all of these media outlets of the guys, the Wolverine Watchmen in their gear with their arms, inside the building. And there's this one picture of them lined up against the wall. And people don't know this, but I'm pretty sure Whitmer's in the room behind them. She's in there. Like, they hadn't like evacuated her at that point. So you're just kind of wondering what is the FBI's plan here? They've got these armed guys. Their informant says that these guys have a plan to storm the building. They think one of them has a live grenade. And so the FBI says, let's just tell them to open the doors and just let everyone in. Let's just see what happens.
Maybe you disagree, but I don't think they're above sacrificing anybody, right?
Yeah, well, they wanted that photo up. I mean, honestly, part of me thinks they wanted something to happen, and there's other stuff with this too. So it wasn't just Whitmer. They wanted other governors too. So Robeson at these meetings was naming Governor DeWine was one of them. So that was a governor in Ohio, and they had an Ohio target. They had a Virginia target, a disabled Vietnam veteran named Frank Butler, who they were trying to get to kidnap and kill Ralph Northam. Now, the FBI sent this man ingredients to make homemade explosives, and then they told him to double the ingredients. The informant in pedo, Steve Robeson, offered the use of a drone for some absurd plot where they were going to have Frank Butler, the disabled Vietnam veteran, launch an assault on Ralph Northam's North Carolina vacation home, which would include the FBI, their informant, providing an explosives-laden drone that they were going to fly into the home and explode it. It's insane. It's insane. So they wanted it to be a multi-state plot. I think they wanted it to be a 15-state plot. They keep talking about the Boogaloo, like that these guys wanted to start the Boogaloo or whatever. The Boogaloo was always a Fed thing as far as I can understand. But in any case, from my understanding of what these guys thought it meant, they thought that was referring to what they saw as an inevitable civil conflict. Not that they wanted it to happen, but they thought it was going to happen, and they wanted to prepare and train in the event that it did.
Which is, again, just like Gladio, them staying back or staying in places like Italy, and basically invading these places before they were invaded by communists, but then performing false flags to then blame the people that they were supposed to fight.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop. What percentage of FBI cosplaying do you think is actually taking place now when we see these atrocities? Do you have any, do you think about that? Like, because I can't help but think about everything. I'm skeptical of my skepticism, but I can't help but think about it.
I know. It's one of those things that, like, I don't want to sound paranoid, or I don't want to just see things that aren't there. But we do know that the FBI now uses tons of CHSs. They spend millions of dollars on the confidential human source program. And from what I can see, many of these informants, if you can even call them that, they don't really act as a traditional informer for law enforcement like you would expect in a sting operation, that an informer is somebody that is there acting as like a passive, like, listening post, basically just there to observe and report back to law enforcement something that's like a crime already in motion, and then they like stop it before it can happen or something. That's what you would think of as an informant, but that's not what they do. They act more as agents provocateur, and you can read the definition for informant versus provocateur in Black's Law Dictionary. Agent provocateur more aptly describes like what the informants in the Whitmer case did. And so we know they'll go as far as, like, let's just say the Whitmer guys are all just regular people. Like, literally, if they could do this to them, they could do it to you. So when I see some random person do something like what happened yesterday, first of all, it's not easy to carry out something like that, to do that alone, and to have that kind of accuracy. What kind of training did this person have?
Yep.
Because they're saying the wind, because of the wind, that kind of threw off the trajectory of the bullet by just a little bit. So I'm going, well, then how skilled is he as a marksman? That doesn't make sense to me, that this is just some random person. There's always more to the story. So I always think that this person was probably in contact with somebody that was grooming them, like, like Peyton Gendron, the top shooter who was talking to a retired federal agent in Discord, and the FBI took over that investigation, and we never got the name of that individual, did we?
How surprising. And when you say informant, it makes me think of the Haiti assassination that happened in the past few years. Did you follow that story at all?
That was so crazy. Yeah. How many of those guys turned out to be U.S. defense contractors that were sent down there? Yeah,
and they weren't stopping it. They were in the house, I think, as the shooting happened.
Yeah.
And now supposedly we're here. Last I heard, the wife might have been involved. And she was even shot, I think, in the leg that night.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So it's just unbelievable. And then thinking about what happened yesterday with Trump, it's so scary that, it could just be a pandemic of incompetence. And this person somehow snuck past a surveillance state onto the roof. But it just seems like a lot of people, perhaps just allowing it to happen for the same thing we were talking about with PatCon, with Whitmer, because they can then portray a monster. They have a new boogeyman that fits the narrative they've been selling forever. Because it's so hard to believe this guy was able to be on this roof.
Oh, I know.
But that's the other thing that's so hard, is the news is coming so fast at us from every direction. You hear various witness accounts. How do you trust it? It's very, very difficult.
It takes time to unravel. Like the Whitmer thing took time to unravel. I thought I knew the case when I started covering it. I didn't know the case until I started speaking with, the actual people involved, until I started interviewing the guys, talking to other people who were at meetings, who were at FTXs, getting their stories. And then, if everybody kind of has the same story, you go, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Then you start finding things that corroborate that. So it takes time. My concern, though, is how long it took them to put a name out there. Is this person a patsy? Like, do we really know? Because there were reports of multiple shooters by at least one witness. And of course, they could be confused and that could be inaccurate, but it's strange. And it reminds me of Las Vegas.
Yes.
And there's just the kind of chaos and the weird things that were being reported that never were followed up on and stuff like that. So it concerns me, though, that number one, they took so long to release the name. It seems to me, and there's no social media for this person, like, oh, did they scrub it before they had the time to put this name out here? Like, how does this person have no internet footprint, really?
Right.
That's just kind of strange to me. And then for the FBI to be the ones investigating it, like, okay, so the people who orchestrated the Fednapping, we're going to put them in charge of this.
We should totally trust them.
Yeah, right. And then Whitmer, who has been spending, the last 2 weeks going on national TV to grandstand about being a victim. And she's been saying, she went on The View, she went on CNN with Abby Phillips, she went on the Colbert Show. And she's saying that Trump tried to have her assassinated, and she brings up the Fednapping as if she is some kind of victim or something. And I just want to address her role in the hoax real quick, just so that people understand that she's not a victim. And when you see her up there lying, it should disgust you. Whitmer is a co-conspirator in a joint venture conspiracy on the part of the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Michigan State Police, the Michigan Attorney General's office, the governor's office, and her security detail to deprive innocent men of their rights. That is what happened. So the FBI's investigation goes from March of 2020, and it's going nowhere, right? In May of 2020, we've got the informant, Dan. He's texting his handler, and he's saying, these guys don't have a plan. They're not really doing anything. Are you wasting my time, in a sense? That's what he's asking the FBI. Now, that is in May. Then the FBI is saying, try to get them focused, try to do this and that, introduce this person, do this or whatever to make this a thing. In July, Paul Beller, the 20-year-old kid, he leaves the group and he creates his own group, which the FBI calls a ghost group. That group, he reiterates, we are defensive only, and we do medical training, and that's it. And he's saying that because he started seeing these FBI informants and their behavior. He didn't like it. Dan took him to a meeting in the vac shack, and undercover agent Mark Schweers is there, and Adam Fox is there. Adam is on steroids. He's stoned. He's worked up and saying crazy things. Paul, and we have this on recording, says to Dan outside the vac shack, that guy is effing crazy. I don't want anything to do with this. So Paul then leaves the state of Michigan and moves to South Carolina. Why does he get arrested and charged with material support and gang affiliation and all this other stuff? Because he attended some of these meetings that were put on by the FBI in an FTX where he taught somebody medical at one of these events. Wow. Well, none of that was illegal. He didn't do anything wrong. It's pretty crazy. And he's one of the people who could be in jail for 40 years. And it's just like, but why though? He did nothing.
Is it just guilt by association in the eyes of the feds?
Yes. Well, because the feds labeled the Watchman a gang, so they are saying he was part of the gang. Wow. So it's gang affiliation. They said he provided material support for DTs because he was at the trainings of the Wolverine Watchman, and it's just crazy. None of it makes any sense. So,
it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to.
No, it doesn't have to, but he leaves. So that's July. He leaves. Barry's he lives in Delaware. He doesn't even live in Michigan. Barry, who was framed as a ringleader, he's not even part of the Wolverine Watchmen. He's not in a militia. He's just an older guy that talked a lot of crap and got stoned a lot. So they're saying, try to bring Barry back into the group. So they're kind of floundering, and the FBI has this TEI. They've spent all this money. They're like, all right, the election's coming up. We got to do something. So the FBI at this point decides to introduce the undercovers and try to get an explosives thing going on, and these recons of the vacation cottage, of Whitmer's cottage. Now, her team and her coordinated the so-called recons of her vacation cottage. That is what I want to make clear. She picked a date and time. The FBI calls her security detail and her, and they say, we're organizing, or like that's what they're doing, the recon of your vacation cottage. Wow. What's a good date and time? We could have these guys do the drive-by, the first recon. They call the daytime recon. Wow. So she's picking the date and time for this to happen. The FBI comes to her cottage. They install what are called pull cams. So they wanted to be able to pick them up driving by the cottage on these pull cams, these videos. So they could say, oh, look at them. They were casing the place, because they wanted to do something. Well, it's all nonsense. She's the one that planned it. Eric, who got duped into going into the daytime recon, he had no idea where he was going when he got in the car that the FBI was driving. He didn't know until he was already on the way there where they were going. They literally drove by the vacation cottage down the street, and then the informant takes them to this restaurant, gives Adam a pen and a paper and says, draw a map of where we just went. And so Adam, Adam's very innocent and childlike. He does that. He gives it to him. And then they organize another one, which was the night of the Luther FTX. This was another FTX put on by the FBI in Luther, Michigan, September of 2020. It would have been the September 12 through 13 weekend. And then they do the nighttime recon. Barry thought he was going to do land navigation training. We have audio of him in the car. So Adam and Barry are in, there's 3 vehicles on the nighttime recon. The FBI is driving all of them. And they have Adam and Barry in the back seat, and then there's 3 feds. So 2 defendants, 3 feds in 1 vehicle. More FBI than not. And the undercover agent says to the informant who's driving, the undercover's in the passenger seat, he goes, do these guys know where we're going? And Barry in the back seat says, destination unknown, destination unknown. And we have that audio. He didn't know where they were going, which supports his story that he thought they were going to do land navigation training. And meanwhile, the FBI drives them up to her vacation cottage. Barry also fell asleep in the car. He didn't know. He had no idea where they were going, and he literally fell asleep. It's just so ridiculous. But Barry is now in Supermax prison because of this. And it's because of, Whitmer organized this stuff. Like I said, she picked these dates and times. And then the FBI, we have text messages of the agents telling the informant, try to invite Brandon Caserta, try to invite Daniel Harris, try to maximize attendance.
It seems like a fully funded Jussie Smollett situation, right? Like they just got the whole Hollywood spectacle for her.